But he said, and everyone who disbelieves every Hasidic story, right, is a bigger fool.
Right.
Right? In other words, if you believe it all, wow, mamish, you're really off in a profound way. But if you don't believe it all, you're also off in a profound way. And I think, of course, what he was pointing to was this difference between, you're calling it, literal and legitimate, and I like it better because you're not calling it metaphoric truth. It's deeper than metaphor.
Right.
It's a deeper truth than metaphor. It's not that, and let's perhaps go back for a second to the example you used, because I think it'll make it clear for us and for people who might be listening. So when we talk about how we praise God, how we sing to God, so there are a number of ways to praise, right, within song. There's what we might call, a kind of praise hymn, as you point out, I'm citing Marcus Borg. And then, today, very often, instead of doing a praise hymn, we'll do a chant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a chant and a hymn are very, very different. Right? A chant and a hymn are very, very different. And a carol, we're coming towards Christmas. A Christmas carol is different as well. Let's just maybe double-click on each one of them for a second. As we're in that season, maybe we'll sing Silent Night in a second. Silent Night, right? So to try and understand what the difference is. So a song which praises God, on the one hand, may not fulfill that experience of being God, right? Of having God incarnate in me, of the self with the small s and self with the largest merging, right? It may not fulfill that, but it's not what it's about. It's about actually turning towards God in a kind of buber I thou, what we like to call in our evolutionary framework, God in second person, the second face of God, right? Sadok HaKohen, Sadok the priest of Lublin, who is a major student of my teacher, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, right, says that God is Ani, Ata, and Hu. God is I, you, and him, meaning first, second, and third person. That's an explicit Torah that he cites from the Zohar. These three faces of God that have now kind of, showed up in different places, among them, in the integral framework that you and I have both, spent time, dialoguing in. So this notion of, Tzadok's notion from the Zohar of these three faces of the divine. So one face of the divine is what we've called God in second person. Right? I'm talking to God. Now, that's not a mythic truth. It's not the Santa Claus God.
Right.
But it's not that it's less than the Santa Claus God. It's more than the Santa Claus God. Meaning, it's not less concrete. It's not less real. It's not less ontological than Santa Claus. It's more ontological than Santa Claus. It's the second person in its most reified, most profound, most ultimately ontological incarnate reality. So it's not the mythic God. We need to crucify, as it were, the mythic God. But the mythic God is the God who's the cosmic vending machine where you put in a quarter and you get a candy. So that's not our God. And even that, we only want to crucify that God, if you will. And Jews talking about crucifying God is, of course, always dangerous. Okay, right. So certainly around Christmas time. So we mean that we don't want to kill that God, right? We want to kill that false and limited idea of God that violates the beauty of divinity. But again, here's the deep point. But only in its childish sense, right? The notion that I pray and that God responds to my prayer, that's not a cosmic vending machine.
Right.
That's not, that kind of, the childish notion that whatever I ask, God will provide, and if God doesn't, God's in trouble, that's the childish notion. But the notion that I pray, and that through my prayer, something transmutes and changes and shifts and shapes in me, and that when something shifts and shapes in me, something shifts and shapes in the universe, in divinity, right? That's actually very real. That expression, that manifestation, that gorgeous playing out of God in second person is real. And that is actually what, paradoxically, non-duality is about. Non-duality means that if I talk to God, God talks to me, right? Because since I am part of God, I can also talk to God. That God in second person relationship is part of, right, the relationship to the divine. And I was talking recently to Durgananda, to our friend Sally Kempton, and Sally talked about deity practice, and so I kind of I made fun a little bit, and Sally's of course deep and profound and beautiful teacher, but we made fun of the phrase deity practice because it kind of limits it. It makes it small. You're talking to God, right? God's responding, right? God listens to all prayer and God responds to all prayer, right? The nature of the response is multifaceted. The nature of the response is sometimes difficult to discern, but that there's a response evoked by arousal from below, in the language of the Kabbalists, that arousal from below evokes arousal from above, right, is a deep and profound truth. So it's not a mythic, literal expression in a kind of childish cosmic vending machine, but it's what you're calling legitimate, meaning a deep ontological face of divinity, and we deface the divine when we lose that face of God. That's for me what that means. So on the one hand, we definitely want to chant, because chants express God in the first person. Chanting is, I am. Chanting is a way for me to access God in the first person, which is why in non-dual systems, chanting is the major mode of religious or spiritual expression, and in God in the second person systems, right, meaning in a church or a synagogue, as opposed to a God in the first person system, meaning, let's say, an ashram or a spiritual center. So in a God in the second person in the church and synagogue, hymns are the major expression. And each one of those is a different face of divinity, and we need to kind of get beyond the kind of mythic, literal, reduced understanding of that to a kind of tantric, a kind of expanded understanding of that, where we feel flowing through us, the gorgeous response of the divine, right, as the divine kind of hears our prayer and hears our broken heart and hears our shattering, right, and feels, and is seared by every hot teardrop, right, that drops from our eyes, right, and is actually gathered and drunk up by God in the divine cup of tears in the description of the psalmist. And we need to kind of hold that, and that really brings us to what you really introduced as the frame, Brother B, which is that we don't want to just expand, we want to first receive. We want to receive, the tradition. We want to receive this deep, profound second face of God, the God that responds to my hymn, before we lose ourselves in the gorgeousness of our chant.
Yeah, I think that you can beautifully say that what we cannot receive, we cannot actually be in any kind of relationship with. We can't have any kind of intimacy with. And that's kind of in a second person mode. In a first person mode, you could actually say what we cannot receive, we cannot be. We are not what we cannot receive. So all of this is to say that if we're only allowing our lives to be the matrix or the interface with the literal or the factual, we're actually missing the huge outpouring of radiance and divinity and blessing that is available. And that there are many, many aspects of our lives that may not seem literally or factually true, but they are legitimately or authentically true. And that we can hold that together.
Beautiful. Could it be, I just want to ask you for a second, this is a technical thing, just because get your voice clearly. Are you in your microphone, wherever that is?
Yes.
Okay, so amen, boya, in the microphone, celebratory, amen. So maybe, does that make sense to you? And let me just throw this one sentence at you to maybe express this in terms of the masculine and the feminine, that the feminine would be, they used to talk about the feminine, when they translated old texts, the feminine was passive and the masculine was active, and the kind of unfolding feminine consciousness correctly rebelled against that. But of course, like many things, it was a misreading of the sources. The sources don't really talk about passive and active. They talk about the feminine as being kind of open and receptive, and the masculine being, more thrusting forward, and acting in. Mm-hmm. So kind of, our God and the God of our fathers, so first, if I'm understanding you correctly, that we need to really be in a kind of profound, receptive, feminine mode, in the sense that, in many Kabbalistic texts, that Tzaddik, the righteous one, is in feminine mode,